Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day I try to get you thinking about areas that technology dominates in our lives, but we're all guilty of taking for granted. For example, let's look at the keyboard on your smartphone. The state of smartphone keyboards have been stuck in the 19th century typewriter format, but we're using these same buttons in a digital world. And did you know that many keyboard apps snoop our private data without us even knowing? And Google and Apple hold a monopoly over the human-machine interfaces, and it is incredibly difficult to break into that turf. But we are seeing a big need for it now, and maybe begin imagining the future of interacting with our phones and beyond. So today's guest is the CEO of a Swiss startup called Typewise, and they're building private AI keyboards and text prediction technology, which was more than enough to set off my spidey sensors and invite them on the podcast today. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Switzerland, where David from Typewise is waiting to speak with us right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's always great to be asked some questions, and that usually stimulates my thinking as well. So my name is David. I'm from Switzerland, and I'm one of the two co-founders of Typewise. We build like the next generation smartphone keyboard, and with that we also build what we call a text prediction technology. So it's basically an AI in quotation marks that understands how languages work, and that also understands how you as a user type and write and spell certain words that may not even be in a dictionary if you use slangs or names. And then this AI then helps you to write faster by giving you good suggestions, maybe a word, or in the future it could be entire sentences to make interaction with your digital devices more comfortable.
Excellent. And like you said there, Typewise does build a private AI keyboard and text prediction technology, and I'm sure everyone listening would like to see a few improvements on text prediction. But can you tell me a little bit more about the problems that you set out to solve and who your target market is?
Sure. So I think the whole thing started with my co-founder Janice sending me a very lengthy email on a Saturday afternoon. We are like high school buddies, and that was a few years after high school, and he described that we're basically, although smartphones, it's cutting edge technology, it has the fastest CPUs and the nicest touch screens and everything is great about them. But the keyboard we use, and actually it's the most used app, so to say, because we use it in all sorts of apps, be it in messaging and social media and email and search. This keyboard always pops up. According to our estimates, it's about 76 times per day. But this keyboard is based on typewriter technology from the 19th century. And it's a bit mind-boggling if you think about it, like, why hasn't it changed? And it's not that it's ideal. If it were perfect the way it is, then there's no need to change it. But already in the 19th century, it was not made for fast typing, but it was basically the way it was designed was that the mechanical, like the mechanics didn't get disturbed by too fast typing. So the keys had to be spaced out more. And while on a laptop keyboard with 10-finger typing, it's decent enough, and there have been other attempts of rearranging the 10-finger layout, and they failed because they're very hard to learn. But on a smartphone keyboard where you only have two thumbs, this layout definitely is not ideal. You end up with very small keys. You make a lot of typos. That becomes frustrating because either your texts, they contain typos, sometimes a lot that they become unreadable, or you have to actually go back and correct what you've just written, and that becomes very cumbersome and frustrating. And that really was the starting point to rethink how would you design a keyboard made for smartphones. And along that journey, we realized that the learning curve needs to be kept to a minimum, so that users who are familiar with the QWERTY layout, as it's called, because of the letter arrangements from the top left, that they don't need a lot of time to get adjusted to like a new system. And that's how that's why we didn't redistribute the keys. We've used academic models for keyboards and found that on smartphones there's little benefit of rearranging keys. You don't really save any time, which is called like the traveling distance of your fingers, which may make a big impact on a large 10, full-size keyboard, but on a small touchscreen it doesn't. So we didn't do that. But what we did is make the keys larger, because that's basically the main issue of the keyboard as it is today. And we ended up with like hexagon-shaped keys, because they best resemble the shape of your fingerprint. And that's how you minimize errors and basically maximize speed, but also a positive typing experience for the user. And that really was the starting point of this whole journey.
And I love that it's not just about that, though, because the world does feel like a crazy place right now, and the Cambridge Analytica problems from a few years ago feel like a walk in the park compared to the government's increasing control on our digital communications, depending on where people are listening to this podcast today. And as a result, of course, many are turning to privacy-friendly apps such as Signal and Telegram. But I'm curious, did that play any part at all in inspiring Typewise too?
Absolutely. I think it was it was not intentional, though.
Yeah.
At the beginning, being an offline keyboard was not a feature, but it was more the lack of online features that, when we released our prototype, we didn't have any online access because that requires quite a big setup. And when we launched the prototype, which we financed through a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign, we weren't able to do that. And quickly we realized that this offline, or this lack of online functionality, was actually a feature, and people loved it for it, because they said, this is great, especially I think on Android, where I think phone privacy is a bigger issue. I think on iOS, Apple tries to protect the user pretty much out of the box, and on Android, you as a user yourself have to choose the right setup with the right apps that will protect your privacy. And if you choose the wrong setup, then you will have a problem potentially. And we found that now many keyboard apps, so speaking about the keyboard, they to overcome the shortcomings of the QWERTY layout with the small keys and many typos, started using algorithms to make corrections or offer text predictions. But to improve those algorithms, they required user data. So all these keyboards have an online access, and at least at the beginning, probably like all of them, pretty much submitted user data to train the central algorithms. And this is what we found. Well, we believe that privacy, the user should be in control of his or her privacy. And the keyboard, because it's so central to whatever you do on your phone, I think it's one of the most critical parts to that. And there's no use of using Signal or a Wicker or a Telegram, for example, if your keyboard is not secure, because then you don't have this end-to-end privacy. And that's why for us, we then continued building privacy into every feature that we developed with Typewise, including the AI part. So there, for example, we obviously have to train the algorithm centrally, but we do that using, for example, public data. And then we bring those to the user's device, and then the personalization to the user's individual typing habits happens purely locally, and there's no need for any user typing data to leave the device. And that's really how we guarantee the privacy of whatever you do with your keyboard.
I think that's fascinating because, like you said, the state of the smartphone keyboards were stuck in the 19th century typewriter format. But I suspect that many people listening are blissfully unaware that many keyboard apps are actually snooping our private data. And there was a story recently on even TikTok that was able to access, I think it was the clipboard. So anything you copy onto your clipboard, people could actually access. But I mean, how many keyboards actually snoop our private data that you know of?
So I think there are two big camps. If we speak about keyboards, there are the Apple, Google, and Microsoft camp, which are the big American tech companies. And well, Apple says that they're not collecting user data. And if you don't trust Apple, then you probably don't want to own an iPhone. So I don't want to say anything against Apple. I think they're very secretive in general. But we have not found any proof of wrongdoing. There was a security issue about a year ago, where although Apple usually doesn't even allow third-party keyboards to transmit data until the user switches on a certain setting called full access. And we, for example, we don't even have this setting, just as a proof that that it's just not possible for us to transmit data. Apple had a security bug where even if the setting was turned off, then the keyboard could read everything the user was doing. So I think it was not intentional, but there was a security issue. But on the Android side, with the Google Gboard and SwiftKey, well, there they do have settings where they say if you turn those off, we will not get your data. And now it's a question of how true is it? Probably. Being big companies, you can probably trust them, but it's always, in the end, it's a matter of trust. And I think that's the problem. With Facebook, it was also a matter of trust. And then the scandal came out, right? And I think also Google had scandals in the past where suddenly data that was not supposed to be linked to other data suddenly was linked. And then, a third party was able to identify personal data. And I think that's always the problem. SwiftKey from Microsoft unintentionally scrambled up email addresses from users. And you as a user suddenly got suggested email addresses from other people that you didn't know. And I think that's always the danger of these things, that I think one is intentional, bad behavior, and the other one is unintentional, but it can still happen. And I think the American companies I would classify into the unintentional side. Now there's another group of keyboards. They're mostly Chinese, but not exclusively. And there have been cases where also these apps subsequently got banned from the app stores because they did snoop personal data and actually sold them on, for example, to advertising networks. And obviously what you type can be very informative and very valuable to any advertising company. Because if they can link that you just wrote about, going to a restaurant to a friend, and then they show you ads that correspond to that. That's very powerful. And often and maybe that's the last point, these keyboard apps, because they're quite deep in the system, they get access to a lot more data than just your typing data. So for example, many of these Chinese keyboards also get access to your GPS location and to your address book, and can read your memory card and get access to your browser history. And you're wondering a bit, well, why does my keyboard need to know all these things? But it does. And I think often users are unaware when installing such third-party apps, because often they have very good ratings on the App Store. So everything seems to be okay. And they promise some improvements with fancy themes or like a lot of emojis. And maybe you try out this keyboard. And even if you don't use it, the GPS tracking, the browser history reading, that will go on all in the background. So that's, I think, also like a way how companies, by using a keyboard, snoop that data. And I think their entire business model is built around that. And I think that's very critical. And unfortunately, this news, although it affected hundreds of millions of people, was more made public on niche tech sites and never made it into a big story.
And a lot of people listening that are hearing about Typewise for the very first time, can you possibly walk me through how it works and how anyone could get the most out of Typewise if they download it now?
Sure. So to use Typewise, you type Typewise into the App Store search field, and you can download it for free. You then it's downloaded as a standard app, and you will open it. And the first thing you will do is go through the tutorial, and the tutorial will explain how you can activate the keyboard in your system settings, so that then it becomes available across all your apps that you're using. And it will also walk you through the features that we have. So right now we're building this into 4 different blocks to make it more digestible to the user. So block 1 is just setting it up. That's done in like 10, 15 seconds. And then the next step is the gestures. So we use gestures to delete text by just swiping left anywhere on the keyboard. We said, well, why do you need a button when now with a touch screen you have swipe possibilities? So we thought really around also not just making keys larger, but also using possibilities of the touch screen. And one of that is deleting and restoring text by swiping left or right. And also to capitalize a letter, like capitalize a letter, you can just swipe up on that letter without needing to press Shift first and then tap in the letter. And that just makes it more ergonomic, but also faster. And you will walk through this tutorial in about 1 minute. And at the end, you have a choice of saying, I would like to transition to the hexagon layout, which requires on average about 1 week of sticking with it until you really feel the benefit, after which you don't really want to go back usually. But it requires a bit of consistency. So it's a bit like it's any behavior change that you also see with fitness programs. You need to stick with it for a few days until you get to feel the results. And for those users that say, look, I'm not good with behavior change, I don't want to do this, but I really like Typewise, I like the gestures, I like the privacy promise, I like your autocorrection that doesn't do crazy stuff and that translates my good text into something else, then you can also choose to stick with the standard QWERTY layout. So we give this as an option at the end of the tutorial. And then if you speak multiple languages, you can set those up in the settings. We support as many languages as you need. Right now we have about 40 languages on offer, and you can type in them simultaneously, and the keyboard will recognize that you switched to another language, and it will adapt its autocorrection and also its text predictions automatically. So there's no need of pressing any button or like manually switching the keyboard when you change languages. And this is pretty much it. Yeah, I mean, there are a few other things, but I think this gives a first impression on how it works.
And I love how you're imagining the future of interacting with our phones and beyond. And I think it is in need of an upgrade. But I'm conscious here, how challenging is it to change people's habits? Because I know you said there it typically takes a week just to get over those old nasty habits. And also, how do you get things like mainstream media journalists on board to help you increase adoption? Because I would imagine that is your biggest challenge.
Yes, I think the biggest challenge, I mean, there are probably three challenges that I see. I think one is building a keyboard is not easy. It may seem like an easy piece of software from the outside. I mean, it's just a few buttons in the end that you can press, and that's it. But there's more to it. The thing is that a keyboard needs to run very smoothly. It needs to run on all sorts of devices with all sorts of languages in any application. And if the keyboard stops working, then that's very annoying to the user because he essentially can't use the phone anymore. So the software quality, I think, if you compare it to a game, which may have a bug in maybe level 5, it's not that dramatic, but with a keyboard, it just becomes unusable and it just kills your entire phone. So that's why, that's something we've realized along the way, that just, like the coding quality needs to be exceptional. And that's not always easy because really it's about getting from 98% to 100%. And those two last percent, they really take a lot of effort. The second challenge, as you said, is changing habits. And the question is, when do you address that challenge? I think we have a pretty smooth onboarding, or we're working towards a pretty smooth onboarding. And there is a subset of people that is willing to change habits. If there's something better, and they, after a few days, they get to feel it, and they also understand when they start doing it, why they're doing it, and what's the expected benefit, that are willing to do this. There are many people that go through a 30-day workout challenge. It's tough. But they say, yes, I'm going to do this, and I know I will see the results maybe only after 30 or 60 or like 180 days, but I'm doing it. So we, right now, and I think you asked about our market that we're addressing at the beginning, we go after that group of people who is like seeking better productivity and who's willing to also change their own habits in return. In the future, yes, we obviously would like to touch everybody's lives on this planet. Like everyone is using a keyboard, so the potential market is huge with billions of people. And I think there are two scenarios. I mean, scenario one is that more and more people, they see other people using it. And maybe the behavior change comes natural eventually, because this change becomes like a revolution. I know it seems maybe for the listener, this seems like crazy thoughts, but as an entrepreneur, I do have to think a bit crazy, and I would not say, from today's perspective that it's unreasonable. It's maybe unlikely, but I would still push for it. The other possibility is to offer different let's say, different like versions within the app, depending on your user profile. And you could say, I'm a power user and I do want to go all the way with all the features. Or you could say, I'm like a user that doesn't want any change, but some of the features, they're just built in, like the better autocorrection. It doesn't require behavior change. It's just a feature that just comes like as you type. So I think maybe that's also a way of segmenting your users and really offer the customized keyboard that's perfect for the respective user. This takes a lot of time to develop because, again, we need to make it 100% perfect for each experience. So that's why right now we focus on this one power user that is willing to do the change. And the third challenge, obviously, is a competition from Apple and Google. They're also working on improving the keyboard. They're adding new features. I think Google does it much better than Apple. We've spoken to a university here in Switzerland that, together with a Cambridge University, they did a big typing study with 37,000 smartphone users globally. And there we also analyzed the raw data, and we also saw how many typos users make using different keyboards. And users of Apple's keyboard, that's just the worst performance. Where about 1 out of every 3 words typed in an Apple keyboard comes with a typo on average. So we believe while Apple and Google are advancing and they have a lot of money and a lot of good people, looking at the actual results, we're confident that we can make a difference even as a smaller startup with less money and less people.
And on a positive note as well, I mean, you guys have recently closed a $650,000 seed round. So can you tell me more about that and how that funding is going to help you progress forward?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the number has climbed to 850,000 as of today. We're looking towards a million. That was the goal, but it's like a stretch goal. So the contract is a bit flexible to allow for that additional money to flow in. How does it help us? In the end, it's really about. Again, the magical 3 things. I think number one, it's about making the product better. Because at the beginning, with many tech companies, you grow users, but you may not generate much revenue. And to continue building a product which allows you at a later stage to generate a lot of revenue at scale, you need funding. And that's the same in our case. We do have users, downloads that came organically. Until today, so we've launched this product in December 2019 to the app stores with a, let's say, soft launch in Switzerland, our home market. And until today, we have achieved 300,000 downloads organically. We haven't done really any marketing spend because we didn't have any money. But still, for this to translate into active users and into paying users, you need to refine your product. What we call like a product market fit. And this is one of our main goals that we want to achieve over the next year with the help of this funding. The second goal is obviously to grow more users, and having some marketing budget helps you launch different experiments that to really find out what is the type of user that really is attracted to our product. So we can test different geographies. Is it maybe European users that may speak more than one language frequently? Is it American users who are very, tech savvy and at the forefront and also have bigger budgets? Is it maybe users from India or Brazil who are not, who often have Android phones and may have crappier technology right now installed, and maybe we can help them by having also a product that's not just focused on the English market. So there are many experiments you can launch. Is it teenagers or is it seniors who have maybe a bit bigger hands and enjoy the bigger keys? So it's really a question of finding the right angle to grow, and a bit of funding helps you to just launch a lot of these experiments very quickly and not lose time. And the third component for us is also to explore text predictions outside of the keyboard. So we envision that we can bring our technology that's relevant for the keyboard also to desktop computers, where maybe not individual words, but entire sentences could be useful in drafting an email. That's what Google and also Microsoft are doing. I think Microsoft just launched it last week. But again, our angle is privacy, that we don't need to read your data. And I think when you talk about enterprise clients, then that can become a very interesting proposition. And this is also something we would like to explore over the next 6 to 12 months and hopefully close our first pilot project in this field.
And like we said at the very beginning of this interview, it has been an incredibly crazy and difficult year. So for all the startup founders that are listening, wherever they are in the world, where do you begin to fundraise during an economic downturn and excite investors and employees with your vision? Because you seem to have achieved this. I'm sure it's not as easy as you make it sound, but is there anything you can share on that?
Yeah, I mean, we started with fundraising. I mean, with a very soft approach. So having some sales background, I've built almost like a CRM database of mostly business angels. I figured at this stage, at least here in the Swiss venture capital environment, business angels would be most likely to support our cause. Here, VCs, even if they call themselves early stage, are usually not that early stage, especially when it comes to software, where it's often expected to see much more revenue. And I think that also comes down to the risk appetite in your respective market. And I think Switzerland has a very comparably a low risk appetite, if you compare it to the Anglo-Saxon venture capital environment. So I think step one is to really understand the market you're in and the type of investor that might invest in you. And if you don't know, then you can have some first conversations. There are often fireside chats you can sign up to, and maybe you could quickly pitch your idea, and you will get a bit of feel. Are people convinced or not, and what type of people are convinced, and what type of people aren't. And then I built this database, and apparently to get one investor, I think you need at least 50 contacts. So I think my database by now has over 100 contacts, and I've started then just cold approaching people. If you have a network that helps you, it's even better. But usually I started with maybe also contacts where I didn't expect too much and where you also can't lose too much. And you get a bit of feel. Many don't write back, obviously, as in with any cold emails, but some do. And then you get a bit of feel. What are maybe the hesitations people have? Oh, it's just an app. This is not a business. Or nobody will use this two-thumb keyboard. Maybe because the person typed with one finger was from another generation, and that's fine. And that gives you an idea of what are the challenges that you may overcome, and then you can tailor your pitch. And I started just tweaking the pitch to more answer those fundamental concerns of people. And I think at some point we got invited to a one pitch after about 2 months, and then then we saw what is the Q&A of the pitch. How do people react? How does our story fly? Yeah, is it clear? Is it, is maybe the problem, the way we phrase the problem, if people can't identify with it, maybe you need to rephrase it. And then only after that, we started approaching like angel networks that organize these pitching sessions on a regular basis. And by then we had quite a solid pitch that we knew was understandable, it was relevant, and it also addressed like fundamental challenging points, why somebody might disregard your idea, and we've built it in. And then we got accepted into two major angel networks here in Switzerland. And then it was a bit of also leveraging my personal network to see, does somebody know somebody in that, from that community, and kind of hear, are there any concerns towards our startup idea? It's just to like be ready then for that one shot. And I think by then it was a strong pitch. And in one of these two sessions, there basically was one investor who said he would take the lead. And that then usually helps, because if you have a lead investor, then you can rally easily more people behind you. So then the next step after the pitching sessions, and those were really at the beginning of March. And in Switzerland, the lockdown started mid-March. So our second pitch, on that evening, just before the pitch started, the government announced basically full lockdown by the next day. And the pitch was still in person, although investors were just joining in remotely. So it was a bit like an empty conference room. And then you can speculate. So we also thought, is this going to be the end to our fundraise? Because stock markets crashed in the US dramatically. One of my coaches said it might be the opposite, because people pull out money from the stock market and may put it in venture capital, especially wealthier people. They might be cycle agnostic. Because startups, they anyway have like a 90% chance of failing. You might as well invest in startups during a downturn if you have the cash. I think it's very complicated to say, was it now made harder or easier? I think what I saw is that, yes, we did lose quite a few investors, maybe some because of the economic uncertainty. Others because they said they needed to focus on their existing portfolio. So money, that's another interesting angle that then pop up, that existing portfolio suddenly needed a fresh cash injection, and so certain investors stopped making new investments. But on the other hand, people also had more time. And it was very easy to organize phone calls. We very quickly had investor calls where many people were able to join because everybody was sitting at home. On the other hand, most of my investors I've only met virtually until last week, where we actually had a get-together with the right social distancing rules, of course. But this is now possible again here in Switzerland. So that was also, I understand. Do you give somebody your money, your personal savings, so to say, if you've never met the person? But it did work, and I think it shows that. I think it's in the end. I think a lot comes down to good preparation, and also to give confidence to your investors with the process and how you set up the process. And there I had a good coach who guided me through the process of saying these are the next 4 steps, and we do those over these weeks, no matter if there's a lockdown, yes or no. It's just the way we're going to do it. And I think with this confidence, you then kind of push the herd into the right direction, and that this is how we were in the end, without any hiccups, able to close the round. And maybe what also helped us was the willingness of our lead investor to include a so-called gobble-up clause, where you do a first closing now, but you leave a bit of room to take on additional investors, let's say over the next 3 to 6 months, at the same conditions. So no changed valuation or terms. And that really helped us because as the economy started picking up again, as the lockdown was eased here in Switzerland, I think confidence grew, and we saw some of the people that were, dragging before, they then came on board as well. And I think then including a bit of flexibility in a smart way in the contract, that may also help during such events. To then still fulfill your initial target.
So where do you go from here then? What's your primary focus going to be over the next 18 months? I appreciate you probably can't share too much, and I'm sure if I asked you what your primary focus was at the beginning of the year, it might have changed to what it is now because of the nature of change. But is there anything you can share about the road ahead?
Absolutely, I think for probably most companies after raising a seed round, looking towards a Series A round, which would then be the next for us, also the next big milestone, where we also want to achieve 1 million active users. And to achieve 1 million active users. We need to get a very good product market fit. So we need to improve the product in a way that's relevant to our users. And we need to build our, in quotation marks, like growth engine with the marketing team that it becomes in like clear which channels we use to attract which users, with what type of value proposition and what type of messaging and visuals. And then that is in line with, well, what do we pay to acquire a new user, with what revenue do we get on average from a new user? And if we reach a balance between these things, we can then start almost pouring in more cash into this growth engine, and then really scale up the company. And that's really to find this mechanics. This requires obviously time. I think it's always crucial, even if you have funding, to try to have enough to also find these mechanics, even if it takes a bit longer to find them. So I guess what I've read, and it's also what my board tells me, having 18 months, runway, it's a good amount of time, because 6 months before you run out of cash, you need to look for like more cash. And it's always good if you then can show significant progress. And I think to show significant progress, 1 year is definitely not too little, unless you might always get lucky, but I wouldn't bet my my business, and also in the end having employees. It's also about their jobs, and having external funds. It's also about those people's money. And I think knowing the people personally, maybe that's a bit the difference from working with a fund versus individual business angels. You also feel a more personal obligation of treating their funds with the due respect that they deserve, and try your utmost best to make it worth their while, which means to really be conscious about any dollar you spend at the end, and try to spend it in a very smart way. And I think finding this mechanics, I think this is going to be our main focus. And then, as with any growing company, I think building a great team culture, building the right, let's say, lean processes, but still processes and mode of working. Work with Scrum, and you work with objectives and key results. And there's a lot of material out there, but in the end, you need to find a modus operandi, so to say, that works for your company and your team. And that's also then something, it's the role of a CEO, but it's also, I think, a team together has to build this, that it's fun and and effective to work together. So I think this, from my perspective, are the things that we're working on.
And for anyone listening that would like to download Typewise or contact you or your team, or just follow your progress as you continue forward, what's the best way of doing that?
So downloading is easy. It's really just in Apple App Store or Google Play Store, type in Typewise, and you will find it. So it's spelled as it is pronounced. To follow our progress, yes, we have been slacking there a little bit in communicating. We do have a very user-centric Telegram group, but this is really for the hardcore fans. But if you're more interested in following the business, we've now started a Medium publication called Typewise. So you can follow that publication, and we'll be posting progress on there. And my intention is also to share a bit about the way towards the goal, and not just the results of the product, but also a bit how, as a team, did we get there, and with the hope of maybe inspiring one or two other people that maybe 1 or 2 years behind us, and maybe can learn something from the mistakes that we did.
Excellent. There's so much I love about what you're doing here, especially for highlighting the state of the smartphone keyboards. And like you said at the beginning, they are stuck in the 19th century typewriter format. And many keyboard apps also are guilty of snooping our private data. So a big thank you for coming on and highlighting that, but also just enabling people to think a little bit differently, especially how we imagine the future of interacting with our phones and beyond. I think it's priceless what you're doing there. So a big thank you for taking the time to share that with me today.
Well, thanks, Neil, for having me. I think it was great. I think the questions you asked were spot on. So it's always a pleasure, to be asked really things that also stimulates my thinking again. So thanks a lot for that.
I think in the light of the recent privacy scandals over the last few years, from everything from Cambridge Analytica to more users turning to privacy-friendly apps such as Signal and Telegram, and of course that increased skepticism of Chinese-made apps, and let's face it, many keyboard apps are Chinese too. And I really think it's an intriguing subject, so I enjoyed looking into it in a lot more detail and I also love how at Typewise they've just closed a $650,000 seed round, and learning how they fundraised during an economic downturn and were somehow able to excite investors and their employees with their vision is incredibly unique right now. But over to you. Are you ready to try a different keyboard on your smartphone? If you do decide to test Typewise, please feed back to me. I'd love to know your initial thoughts, but remember, as David says, give it a month if you can to try and rid yourself of all those habits you've picked up over the years using those old typewriter-style keyboards. So please let me know. Email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, and you'll find links to all my social channels there as well if you'd like to direct message me on any of those. But today's episode is a little bit longer than usual, so I don't want to keep you any longer than I need to. I do invite you to join me again tomorrow, where we'll do it all again. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.